It is September. It's the month of September. Skies are blue right here in upstate New York. We're looking at a day of, I don't know, I think it's still in the 60s. I'm not somebody who covets wearing a sweatshirt. I'm not big into getting like a pumpkin latte, in late August. But nonetheless, it feels kind of good. This fall stuff comes too early, doesn't it, Michael?
Well, as we said, when we've been talking about the barn swallows leaving and fall coming. Now, so we had really hot and humid weather. Maybe a week ago. Well, the last time we talked. Well, when we talked about cloud busting.
Yeah.
And it was really warm here. And remember, I told you that I was trying to pull over some rain, and it made it 3 miles south of us, but it didn't really hit us. But there was
cloud busting fail.
Well, no. Listen. So, okay. And I told you that when you do it, there's the pulling over method, but there's also the way that you can just leave it there and you kind of change the envelope, and within 24 to 48 hours you get rain. Okay. And we got a heck of a lot of rain 48 hours after that.
Good. Yeah.
And it was funny because my wife kept saying, she was looking at the weather maps, you got to pull that over. I'm not going to touch it because I already had it out, and it's going to, trust me, it's going to rain within 48 hours. Well, you better go do it. You better go do it right now. I'm not going to do it. So we had these, and like I said, other couples don't have these arguments, but we did.
things that couples into cloud busting argue.
I'm telling
about.
you, man.
Yeah. Episode 25 of the Regeneration Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Regeneration Podcast. Michael and yours truly, Mike Sauter, are with you. Today we have a guest. His name is Hunter Scholl, and he's a college student I've known for a couple years now. He's a real blend of totally unique, but also gets, to an outsider, really gets his generation's sensibilities exceedingly well. And so it's, am I pronouncing your last name right? I've known you as Hunter for
completely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Hunter
you're
Scholl.
Completely right, Mike. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about your background right now, but before Michael signed on, we were just talking about, I'm at SUNY Geneseo campus right now in the State University of New York. And it's always been seen as kind of a liberal campus. And as years have gone by, and Michael Martin, you'll get this, as many or more people are wearing tie-dyes and Grateful Dead t-shirts, but it has no connections to whether somebody's actually free-spirited and relaxed. And Hunter was just talking about that. What's your experience? You kind of went that route, Hunter.
Yeah. So my background is I grew up in the suburbs of Syracuse, and kind of just lived in that sort of ingenuous, sort of inauthentic sort of, I grew up in that. So I was always very interested in philosophy. I always wanted to be like a free spirit. I grew up doing martial arts, so I was very kind of I had one foot in the East, if you will. And then I kind of came across like the Grateful Dead and stuff when I was in high school. So I kind of really took that persona on for a while. And I went through like a really rough, respectively, like looking back at it, like it was rough looking back. But like a new agey sort of thing, because I was really trying to find myself. And it was finding myself, this is what I was saying to Mike, is that I was very anxious. So I put on this persona that was like this complete 180 of that, but it was really just that. It was a persona. I was like that for a while, and I almost convinced myself that was an authentic expression of myself. And I think that's what I've been seeing a lot on campus, like actually like took mental note, because it's still this week. So we're just getting through the first week of classes here. And I've seen so many dead shirts, and like I'm very keen on that because like I know that's that iconography, if you will, very well, and I'm seeing it everywhere. And I'm like, part of me is like, do you really listen to the Dead? Because I'm a really big fan, but also it's like we're putting on a show, we're putting on a persona. I am relaxed, I'm free spirited, I'm all of these kinds of things, and I think it's a lot of people that maybe aren't really like that at their core, and they're trying to fake it till you make it kind of thing.
That's a good aspiration in one sense.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I'm in this Eastern philosophy class, and this was the first day of classes. We're sort of talking about ourselves. And there's a student, and he just brings up that he's like done psychedelics and stuff. So the conversation sort of like turned to that too. So I think it can be a little bit of muddy waters when it comes to that, because you enter that space, you sort of enter these other things too. Where I think on Sunday we had what was his name, Mike? On Sunday, his homily about
Father Marcoux. Yeah.
So I think it's a slippery slope into that realm. And I in terms of my generation, if that's something that you guys want me to talk about, I'm seeing a lot of that, people sort of ending up in that downstream of new age sort of woo-woo kookiness, if you will. not that it's all bad, but it can get very messy.
So what's your sensibility with that? And Michael, break in any time. When you're saying that, and you're right, and I've talked to you a lot, Hunter, to label something new age isn't definitely bad. Like if you were to unpack that, you're not somebody that I know that would just say like somebody outside the Catholic fold bad, and I know that totally truly. How would you unpack that a little bit? If you see somebody sliding into this, to look at that slide, are you seeing that they're sliding into something that is going to take them to a dark place? Does it just seem so artificial and contrived? Like, why does it even have a negative connotation?
I think the negative connotation is simply that there's not and I'll relate this a little bit to another thing that I understand well, and that's martial arts, is the new age-iness it's a very self-inventive sort of culture, very much so. And I think that's a lot of the culture. I mean, even in terms of like the gender theory and stuff now, a lot of my generation, because there's not a strong cultural foundation of like, who are we? What are we doing? There's a lot of self-invention. And with the new aginess, there is a lot of self-invention and stuff isn't very consistent. Whereas in whether it's like Buddhism or you're Muslim or you're a Christian, you have a sort of set, you have a discipline. It's a very undisciplined thing. So people end up with some strange ideas. And it'd be like if you're a martial artist and you're going to go into the ring and you don't have a system of what you're doing. You're kind of just like, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to throw this in, and it's not going to work. And then you might end up in a place where you're worse off than you were in the beginning because you actually don't have a roadmap. And I think that's probably the biggest issue, is that there's no roadmap when you're just kind of, and don't get me wrong, we have to be spiritual explorers. I think that's huge. That's part of the reason I ended up coming to the faith. But you have to eventually find some sort of roadmap. And I think there are some kids that aren't finding them. So then they're trying psychedelics and they're dropping acid and stuff because they want to find themselves. And then they end up in this place where they're like, how did I get here? I'm more depressed. I'm more aimless than I've ever been. And I've had a couple friends of mine that have gone down that path for sure.
Well, it's a classic story, right? I mean, this is not just something characteristic of 2022. I mean, this was going on when I was a kid. This was going on when you ever read the book by Hermann Hesse, Damien, right? Which is the same story right there. And it's attempted to try to find the truth. Because now I don't know about you, Hunter. I mean, if you grew up in a practicing Christian household or anything, but whether people do or don't, you get to about 22 or 2022, and you're like, I need to figure something out. I need to figure out what's real. I remember when I tell this story to my students all the time. I said, well, I'll never forget. I was 19 years old and I know exactly where I was standing. And I realized I didn't have an idea in my head that was mine. It was all stuff I'd either, inherited from my parents or from my peers or my working class Catholic background but it wasn't, I didn't have any ideas. I didn't know anything really. I parroted things and it terrified me. I think, wow, maybe I should start reading books. You know what I mean? Because I wasn't in college, so I started reading a lot. And like you said, I realized. I mean, I had been pretty philosophical even as a teenager, but I didn't have. I took a philosophy class in high school, but the teacher was so dull that everybody fell asleep, whether they tried to stay awake or not. Everybody fell asleep. He was so dull, and that was my.
Isn't that the devil when they take these powerful things like philosophy and kill it early with you by giving it the boring?
This guy, he had a voice like a hypnotherapist. You know what I'm saying?
It was a white noise machine for a voice. Right?
Yeah, we're all sleep deprived teenagers anyway. That's all we needed.
Yeah. I told my experience with that too is I can identify with you, Hunter, right? And Michael, exactly. Two episodes when I realized how dumb I was. I graduated, honors and everything. My GPA was high. I never went to class, but I found out how to beat the system. No cheating. Just like, what does the professor want to hear? But my dad, I remember distinctly, my dad was talking something about affirmative action. And I answered the question I inserted. I said, I took a class on that, Dad. And I heard myself say that. And it felt like that statement it was just so untethered from anything real. And this podcast is all about the real, that I heard myself say it. And then I'll tell people that I worked in a factory there for like 3 years, night shift, just to clear my head. And then when I was still lost when I decided my mom pointed out in a church bulletin that there was this grad school locally that would teach theology. And I wanted to throw up like, well, Mom, you want me to be a Jesus freak? What's going on? But I took an exploratory class and I felt good there, but it was my second or third class. It was on sacramental theology, and I was going to write kind of the paper on offer. But then I realized I was going to ignore the assignment, and I was going to say how I thought sacraments worked. But it was my first time to write anything about like what I actually thought from my heart of hearts. It was like I researched it like a scientific experiment. What do you think, Hunter?
I think that reflection of, wow, I actually don't know that stuff. I think maybe part of it is the generational gap. Like, what are we experiencing here that might make it a little bit different than that's the, hey, self-discovery. I don't know things I need to discover to find myself. That's definitely a universal thing. But I think the thing that makes it different now is that we have so much information. We have too much, and people just take it in. And like I was saying about the kids talking about psychedelics, and he brings up Terence McKenna and all these things. He thinks that everything that he's saying,
Terence McKenna's awesome. Go ahead. Yeah.
Like he legitimately, with the way that he was expressing himself, because I've already been down that road a little bit. The stuff he started, like I literally knew what he was going to say before he was going to say it, and he thought that he was like being authentic. He thought that he was coming from the roots of him, who he was, and it was just sort of this thing that I've heard before. And I think it's because we have so much information that it's hard to realize that we are parroting things. And I think that's an issue. And it doesn't mean that he can't, or that, people can't eventually figure out that, oh, wow, a lot of these thoughts that I have aren't really my own individual thoughts. But I think that's definitely muddies those waters for sure, is that there's just so much information that it's hard to even tell, oh, wow, that's actually not my thought. That's somebody else. And I'm just saying that like I know it.
Yeah, and a little contextual piece here too is that I'm working, and I can't speak for Michael, but I'm working lately from a framework, and it's probably been articulated here, but like I articulate anything, I make it more confusing. But there's these things going on now that, again, it's always been this way, and yet something has changed dramatically. So yesterday I was meeting with the vice president in charge of student life here, and they were talking about the mental health of young people. And he said, all these trends were going in terms leading into COVID, but then it also changed so drastically that nobody knows what to do. We've lost, we lost the ability to get a handle on it. So, I've mentioned before, at the first time I'm thinking like, I think young people, but something has so radically changed. It's one of the reasons, like Hunter, you're here when we had Aiden on, and we're going to continue. Mike has his own children. He's got other college kids, because it's not like the whole world changed, but something is really different too, so I appreciate that. Let me read a quote that was left on the other one, because it does tie in. So on the podcast where we had my son, who is another young person, talking about some of this, Christian Guild says, as someone who is raised by Gen X and finds himself situated between millennial and Gen Z, it was so fascinating and refreshing to hear someone who sees and hears similar things that I do. And I really hope that this trend continues for the sake of humanity. Otherwise, I fear that there's this great doom on the horizon, and I honestly can't fathom how to escape it unscathed. I do think one difference between Gen Z and the younger millennials, including myself in this category, is that we would still emphasize, in my opinion, in my view, in my experience, etc., as opposed to making universal statements, even if we thought they were universal as such. I think this is due to the influence of the relativism of the older millennials while noticing the same issues in Gen Z. So I don't need to continue there, but it's somebody, and young people I'm meeting, they're really convinced that they can't communicate with the generation above too much, and there is, if nothing else, there's this massive sense of hopelessness. Again, massive increase in mental illness, but a wild, exponentially increased sense of hopelessness, and there is nothing there in us for the future. No pension, no jobs that could pay bills. And I'm still trying to unpack this. I just thought I'd share that from this nice commentary.
So actually, here's I just wrote an email to Christian Guild.
Awesome.
He emailed me a couple of days ago.
Isn't this great?
And he lives very far. I'm trying to get him to come from Michaelmas.
Nice.
Now, one of the things I have started assigning students to read in some of my classes is the Gnostic fairy tale, The Hymn of the Pearl, which if you know this. And if you don't know it, David Bentley Hart's new book, Kino Gaia, is based on this. as is Terrence Malick's film The Knight of Cups. And the whole idea of the Hymn of the Pearl, it's a Gnostic story about the son of the king who's sent into Egypt to retrieve this pearl that's guarded by a serpent. But his father, in classic fairy tale fashion, there's a prohibition. When you go there, don't dress like them and don't eat their food, or you'll forget who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the boy goes there, gets a friend, eats the food, forgets who he is. Right, so he doesn't know who he is, and which is, I think, something that happens to a lot of young people, especially when they go to college. Or myself too. I mean, I always use the example of myself. So when I was 18 years old, I got a record deal, and for a local band, we had a lot of success locally and internationally, but that's a lot for a kid who's 18, right? And I forgot who I was, and it was not completely debauched, but it was not something I wanted my kids to do, right? And I saw things by the time I was 21 that most people don't see in their entire lives, including, here's a great story. This is we played a gig at the Ritz in New York City when I was 19.
Place. Yeah.
I was 19, and the booking agent who worked there, he was obviously gay, but we liked him. He was let us play the gig, and then we played a few days later, maybe a week later, we played a gig at CBGB's, the classic punk club.
I know it well. Yeah, my brother-in-law lived right across the street from that club.
Oh, it was a dump, but it was great. Yeah. I love that place.
Yeah.
That's my kind of place. So we played this gig there, and he came to this gig, and our drummer kept trying to tell me, this guy's trying to get me drunk to take me home, but I'm not going to fall for it. So, and he wasn't drinking too much, and the guy kept working at him. And our drummer never went. He just wouldn't take the bait. but we kept teasing him. We said, "You're just imagining this. You're crazy. You just think everything's about you." We were teasing him. But just last year, this promoter came out with his autobiography, and he describes exactly what he was trying to do. Which was exactly that. It names my drummer by name.
Really?
Yeah. He didn't mention his last name, but he mentioned the name of the band and the name.
Yeah, right.
And that was definitely going into the land of eater food, right? And that's what happens in the film, The Knight of Cups. It's
Christian Bale and some
Christian Bale, and he plays this screenwriter who goes to Hollywood to be a screenwriter. I think it's loosely based on Terrence Malick's experience as a screenwriter, and he forgets who he is. And what happens in both the fairy tale and in I think human life is eventually you get a message from your father. Remember why I sent you. Remember why you're on Earth. Basically, remember the task I had given you. And the boy wakes up. And I think it's the classic mythological sequence of leaving, finding something, and returning. It's Orpheus in the underworld, right?
Absolutely.
But I think maybe that doesn't happen to everybody. I don't think it does, but I think it happens to a lot of people, and it happens to the kind of people who want to know why we're here, what the meaning of life is, right? So they're trying to find something, but you get lost along the way. A lot of people get lost and never come back. They eat the food of the Egyptians or the psychedelics and go on dead tours and never come back, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And never come back. I mean, what are you, about 19 or 20?
I'm 21.
You're 21? Yeah. So then you go to these dead shows and there are guys older than I am.
Yeah, and they're stuck in that space. That's kind of where they ended up. And that was my experience, absolutely. So I was raised Catholic, but not really in your sort of typical, go to catechism on Sunday, go to, Sunday school. And I didn't like it. It seemed overbearing and sort of authoritarian, if you will, especially as I was growing up, and I really didn't like that kind of stuff. So the entrance into that land of Egypt, if you will, was really a reaction to that. And I remember not wanting to be confirmed. And I was talking to my dad, and he was like, just, you don't get it right now. Cause he was, especially growing up, like he was an altar server. Like he did a lot. He was very Catholic.
He was all in.
My grandparents. Yeah. My grandparents were very Catholic. He sort of turned away because of some of the current church politics, be those as they are. But he was like, just do it. Just trust me on this. You don't get it now, but do it.
Oh yeah.
And then I went down. I thought I was, and then I went down a path Buddhism and sort of the whole Eastern thing. And I was meditating a lot, I was listening to the Grateful Dead and, doing all that kind of stuff. And I thought, like, this is it. I found it. And it was right after I graduated high school. It was my senior year. And I go into we had a friend that was Egyptian and she was Coptic Orthodox. And they were having this festival and you could go into the church during this festival and just kind of like see what it was all about. And up front in the Orthodox church is the iconostasis. And I'd never seen one before. And it was a really subtle, quiet, but honestly like mystical experience where I was seeing this iconostasis for the first time. And I was drawn to it. I was drawn into this sense of meaning that I'd never felt before.
To a sacred space.
Yeah, exactly. And I talked to this guy afterwards and I was like, what is this? And he goes, oh, well, this is actually this is a Russian iconostasis that was here from the previous Russian Orthodox Church. And it just clicked for me because I was born in Russia and then I was adopted into the States and stuff. So I was kind of like, that's weird.
I have a theory, Michael, that Sergei Bulgakov's wife nursed Hunter as an infant.
She would have been a little old at the time. That's it was like Sarah from the Old Testament. But
go ahead, Hunter. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're totally good. And but then I ended up talking to him and he told me about like the Desert Fathers and stuff because they're Egyptian and stuff. So they're very keen on the Desert Fathers. And I went home and I looked up the Desert Fathers and I was like, my mind was blown at the sort of mystical frame of meaning that I'd been looking for the whole time that was like finally starting to peek out at me. But it was all by not accident. It was all by grace. And I think some people, like you're saying, Michael, is some people are receptive to that and then they'll end up finding their way back home. And some people they don't necessarily maybe have the ears to hear, or maybe it's not their time yet. Or some people just say, nah, I don't like that stuff anyway. And I think they stay where they feel comfortable, even if it's not.
Well, Valentin Tomberg alludes to this in Meditations on the Tarot. And he says, some people just need to know. They can't just go along, right? To get along. People just need to know, right? Yeah. And I think, and it's not everybody. I mean, I don't even know some of my kids are not the kind of people who need to know.
But if we see the pain people are in, is there a way? So obviously evangelization, like, hitting somebody over the head with Jesus talk or something is horrible. But is there something we could do to help people? I always tell people at the beginning of the Bible, right? It's for me, it starts when God asks Adam, "Where are you?" which kind of gets at the hymn of the pearl, But how could we? Because we still I want to address this suffering. I think you're right. Some of us, we don't want to say genetically are prone to ask where we are, but I'd like to hear from both of you. Like, isn't there something we can do looking at the pain around us to get people to ask that question more? Like, where am I? What's going on here? The phrase, "what's going on here," is something I utter to myself 50 times a day, at the microcosmic level to the macrocosmic level.
Like last night when I was watching that bizarre speech.
I didn't even watch it. Oh, what the hell's going on here? Yeah.
It was like, wow. That was surreal. But anyway,
what do you think we could do, Hunter? Like, to give more people, can we help them get to that place where they scream out from the abyss? Like, I want to know what's going on.
I think you just said it though, scream out from the abyss. And I think part of you see it a lot on campus, Mike, because you're here and you see it, the anxiety, the hopelessness,
the pain.
I think the pandemic it opened a wound that was already there. And I think people are starting to ask what's going on because things are so, and who knows what the future has in store. But I think that's unfortunately partially what's necessary, because that's kind of the place that I was in when I was finally receptive to sort of meaning that was beyond my comprehension and things that were starting to pull me in a certain direction. I had to be in that place. And I think there are a lot of people post-COVID and post sort of, this current economic situation. There's a lot of stuff like that.
So Hunter,
need that.
Not to interrupt, how were you educated K-12?
Public school.
Public school.
Go public schools. Just kidding.
No, well, because what I talk about this with students, and I've been talking about this with students for 20 years, and I notice less and less do students come to college equipped with decent writing skills, or my experience is that none of them, or very few, have ever been in a kind of formal setting where they've been asked the life question. This is what Pierre Hadot, the French philosopher, says in his book, philosophy is a way of life. Because the life questions I always tell students, were super simple. I mean, it's at first, I tell them philosophy is just asking really dumb questions like, why am I here? Or what are you doing today? But when you start to unpack a little bit, then you actually realize, I don't know what I'm doing today. I don't know why I'm here. Why don't I? Right? And so, and so there's even my own kids who were homeschooled. I mean, these kids read Plato and Aristotle and Thucydides and Shakespeare in high school, and they would complain the whole time. I said, trust me, when you get to college, you will be the only person who has ever read this stuff because you'll be the only person who has ever been presented the life question, right? Or just about the only person. And I think that's what I see with a lot of students. And then in my classes, and I have taught in urban colleges right now. I teach at a kind of a rural college. It's universal. I don't care what the racial or ethnic or religious background of the kids are. They're never going to have this. And then when you give them the opportunity to think about this, they're like, whoa. For instance, just this last week, I'm teaching a class on rhetoric and writing theory, and I had them read Plato's Gorgia, which is a dialogue. And it, has a lot of the life questions show up, like not only about virtue and a lack of virtue, about justice and injustice, but also about what the role of language is and of writing is. Is that, what is persuasion, right? What's the difference between persuasion and propaganda, right? Which no one ever gets asked these questions. And it was really profitable in our discussions in this class. I was surprised at how first of all, I was surprised that so many read the text, but I was surprised that how into it they were. They wanted to talk about this because they could see that this 2,300-year-old text still was relevant, and even more relevant now we're in the age of propaganda, or in propaganda wars, than anything. So, I mean, the life questions, there's a reason Socrates was asking. There's a reason that the history of philosophy has been, and I should say more recent times, continental philosophy has been attentive to rather than paying attention to the appropriation of ideology by so-called philosophers like Judith Butler, who don't ask the life question, but who promote a kind of political ideology through the appearance of philosophy. And I don't think it is philosophy at all, because the philosophy is about, the love of wisdom first, and the path to, as it said, right? Know thyself. That's the task. Let's do that first.
Having subbed in a high school last year, I think, somebody should write a book. The life questions I heard uttered were usually in the cafeteria, and it's like, what constitutes the material inside this chicken nugget? But at least there's a sense of wonder there, and maybe we could begin. But your point is so well taken.
And then discussed.
And again, maybe I don't lead it to like how animals are treated. What's your take, Hunter?
I think you guys are starting to point to something that I was actually having a conversation with my roommate last night, and we were like, because I was mentioning that this was something I was going to do this morning, and I was like, here's some of my thoughts. And frames of meaning are really important, but especially, like I was saying, I was public school, all that kind of stuff. The frames of meaning that, at least from my experience, and I'm going to assume it's probably pretty similar for most in my generation, at least in my public school, which is a lot of people, is the frames of meaning that we were given were these political ideologies. And there are these things that we have this bucket of political ideology. Here you go. This is what the meaning of the world is. And I think a lot of kids, like, they take that, and you see some people, I think that's why we see a sort of, at least my generation, like a hyper activist sort of, Mike, would you say that the college sort of pushes that? Yeah. I mean, that's the frame of meaning that we've been sort of handed. And a lot of kids are either they completely take to it and it becomes a sort of religious thing, or they don't take to it at all and they kind of are in this space. And
this is very well said. Continue.
Yeah, and we're asking those life questions. I think there's a lot of kids that just have not been allowed. They haven't even seen that those are questions that you can ask, or those are questions that you can answer. And not that necessarily you can answer them, but that you can sit in the wonderment and the mystery of like, oh wow, like, and there's something about being in that space of wonderment. And I think with the materialist sort of bent that a lot of this generation is on too, is they just want the answer. They don't
want a quick answer.
They don't feel comfortable in that space of being like, well, it's a mystery, we don't know. And I think both of those things lead to the sort of hyper anxious, like if you want an answer and you can't sit in mystery, of course you're going to be anxious, because there are some questions you just can't have an answer to. And then they're not presented with like I said before, like a discipline to sort of engage with those sort of things, or they've never been exposed to it at all. So what they have to fall back on in terms of a frame of meaning where they can connect to other people, because that's what we want. That's what I found very deeply in the church. And I don't mean that like I go to church and I go to coffee hour after and I just talk to people. I mean that in like a really more cosmic sort of way, like where we're all saying the Nicene Creed together, we're all saying the Our Father together. It's like we're like connected in this really strong frame of meaning, and like there's a real communion here, and that's what a lot of kids are looking for, and they're not finding it.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, there's several things going on here, right? So first of all, is even when you're a deadhead, right? You're looking for a community. You're looking for, who are my people, right? And a church is, well, it can be a community, right?
We wish it could be better, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's why Dorothy Day called it the long loneliness, because you can go to church. I don't know anybody in this place.
Or Annie Dillard's essay on trekking to the pole, right? How silly it can seem, right?
But so there's that, and there's this attraction for community, and I think people have a hunger for it because we live in such impersonal spaces. I mean, we don't have a sense of community, and I had to stop. We're Byzantine Catholic, but we'd have to drive an hour to go to church, and it's like, this is nuts. This is insane. This is not a community. This is, I mean, these are not the people I live in. I mean, I like these people. These are not the people I live with, right? So how do you do that? And I think modernity has totally destroyed that. In fact, now we talk about community. It's the gay community, the cigar smoking community, or the whatever, right? And they're not communities either. It doesn't, that word, you keep using the word, I don't think it means what you think it means. So there's that. But the other part of it is, and I think this is what you're responding to too, Hunter, is we don't expose young people to these wisdom traditions. So when you read the Desert Fathers, you're entering into a wisdom. Or when there was a course I was teaching, I'd love to teach it again, where I can't remember the name of the course. It was at a Dominican school nearby, and I haven't seen them since COVID. But
what if they're all gone?
What happened? Well, so it was a course. So one of the things we read was the Tao Te Ching, which is, if you read, I remember the first time I read that when I was about 20, I was like, yeah, this is beautiful. This gives me stuff to think about. And we also read Marcus Aurelius, and we read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because this is being immersed in these kinds of wisdom traditions. They are all of them preoccupied with the life questions. Even the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I mean, you read it, it's about the excarnating soul going into the afterworld or afterlife, and then reincarnating, and how does that work? And it's a beautiful example of psychology, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's the best book ever written on purgatory, to tell you the truth. And but even that, so you do the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and you have, here's a life question: what happens after we die? Right? Mm-hmm. So the Tibetan Buddhists have one interpretation. Some Christians have another interpretation, but it's worth thinking about. And even new atheists will go, we just go out like a candle. Oh, that's fun. But why do? But then the other thing is, why do all these traditions all over the world until modernity have some, I could say, philosophy or theology, or at least understanding of what happens after we die, that can't be explained through reductive kind of materialism? But all of them have this, right? All these wisdom traditions have this, and they don't, and they assume it's real, because it's not a wish fulfillment. It's their experience. It's their experience that this is true.
Everybody thinks it's wish fulfillment.
Well, all the materialists, the scientific materialists do, but
there's Hunter. Before you respond, there's this notion of being able to sit with these, though, is still key. Everything Michael's saying is 100% true. I remember, we're all speaking from the same book here, friend, but I was teaching social studies at a Catholic high school, and a book the students really responded to back in the early 90s was Krishnamurti. I think it was called Think on These Things. But then specifically, one I read, the concept was creative discontent, right? That discontent, sitting with discontent can be very creative. And, that goes to your point, sitting with this. And that, Michael talked about the distinction between like a community and a crowd. When we talk about the gay community, we're talking about, in some sense, or any other community.
It's a focus
to do
group.
With the gay. Yeah, it's a focus group.
Focus
it's a crowd. Received opinions. Let's go to a political one, especially. A better example is like the Democratic community or something. The worst. But with creative discontent, you have the distinction between you're sitting there, and again, is it creative or is it clever or is it creative, right? So discontent leads to creativity, like an artist. But when you're in a crowd with like the Democratic Party, all you can be is clever, and Michael in his books, and when I read your book, I think it was probably Submerged Reality, it could have been in Transfiguration. Probably. You're the only other person who got at it so clearly, but I've always thought like movies made by committee, right? What we're calling these Disney things, they're very clever, and it doesn't mean we can't enjoy them. But movies made by committee aren't creative. They're not cutting something new. And so eventually you're in a hall of mirrors, and we're all waiting for the new Minions movie or something. And I don't want to just be a killjoy, but this stuff, it's too much for me to handle, but creative discontent will lead to creativity. Crowd formations and no discontent, you're never going to find any creative solutions to your life. You're never going to find that question, where are you? Right.
No. And I think the other thing is we get, and this is, I think, part of the problem of our electronic media is that, so we talk about, say, the gay community, cigar smoking community, feminist community, women, they're stereotypes. Those are not, those are, and, they assume that all women are pro-abortion, which is insane because millions and millions of women who are pro-life, right?
Yep.
Or they assume that if you're gay, you don't like Trump. And I know dozens of gay people who voted for Trump and would vote for him again, right? So those kinds of labels are in a way it's kind of propaganda to shut down conversation because they try to make you assume that everybody of a particular thing believes the same way. Black people are all Democrats, which is baloney, right?
Yeah.
So
and it's constricting too. It doesn't allow people to be the individuals. And when you see the world in that frame, because that's a lens through which you see the world. I don't see the world that way, or at least the very least, if I do, I try and remedy it in the best way that I can.
It's out there, and this is how the archons, this is how they want you to think, right? Which Absolutely. Is what Mike and I have a patron saint, William Blake, which he calls mental slavery, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
This is what it is, and don't let yourself be enslaved. And this is a question, right? So that has lived with me for I don't know how long, probably since the first time I read William Blake when I was about 23 or 22. Is that how do we know that we're not manipulated or brainwashed? I ask questions. I've been asking students this for years. How do you know? Or if we do think it's possible, it's never us. It's always the problem somebody else, right? Those people are brainwashed. It's never us, right? We're never the ones, but we're all being manipulated all the time, and it's we're at an incredibly sophisticated level of it right now. And I think we saw this more in the last 2 years. And it's almost out of the closet, and people still deny it's happening.
Yeah,
right?
And I think, and what I've at least seen myself with my generation is we were, post 9/11, the system of propaganda, the system with the internet and all that kind of stuff, it's so much harder to be in the water and to see it. Like it's really hard to have your head above it.
Right.
And I think a lot of kids, they will be clever. They'll say the thing that they think they should be saying, and they think that it's a legitimate, authentic, because we're so deep in it. And I'm very grateful that I have perhaps this gift to like maybe see above a little bit. And I think partly it's just because I've tried to explore so much. But a lot of kids, we're so deep in it that we don't even see that, like, we don't even think it's a possibility that we're even there. A lot, and I see a lot of friends of mine, and I was even like this for a little bit, where you don't even realize, oh man, a lot of these ideas I have are just not, or these frames of reference that I have about the world are just really, they're baloney, and they're not good, but you don't realize it. They're so deep in it because our formative years have been where you could probably say it's been some of the most insidious and under the radar, but very powerful.
I wonder, Hunter, if for you that you mentioned since a child you've been involved in martial arts. When my son Aiden was on, he made a connection between Joe Rogan's popularity and the fact that his two areas of expertise, comedy, I don't think he's the funniest guy, but comedy and martial arts, multiple martial arts. Again, these are the areas where you don't get participation trophies, right? Going back to this conversation I had with the vice president of college, he said, there's so many things they can't control, like ambient anxiety, this or that. But on this issue of the type of people we're building by not allowing kids to fail and everybody, getting participation trophies. Yeah. Yep. He said, we are trying to address that by letting, like, if right now, there's every verb has a student club, right? When I was in college, you had a couple of student clubs. Now, somebody could take breathing. Okay, we're going to turn that into a club. You write the Constitution. We have a swimming team here at Geneseo. Then somebody still sets up a swimming club. And I wondered, where's the room for just like swim? People who like to swim. That being said, they're at the college, at the leadership level, they're trying to allow a lot of these clubs to die. Let the people who formed them to put it on their resume. If it's not working, even years ago, they said they would have helped kind of keep them going. But again, your experience with martial arts, and you're wondering why maybe your head was to be above water, is that you have to deal with kind of real life on that, right? Again, it's one of the unique areas where, again, an unfunny comedian is going to learn failure. And an untalented martial artist is going to end up with a bloody nose.
And like that's the thing, is you learn quick, and you learn that I think the biggest thing is obviously you learn struggle. I've learned hardship. I've been in the ring, I've fought and stuff, and it's something you have to commit to. And it's definitely something where there's a lot of blood, sweat, and a lot of hard work that goes into it. But I also think the primary thing is when I'm sparring or I'm in the ring or comedy, for example, or even this conversation, it's something where I have to be totally here, paying attention to this and being authentic, even if it's my level of authenticity is maybe it's really low because I'm just starting to figure out who I am. I can't be parroting stuff. You can't go into the ring and not be focused on what you're doing, or else you can't do that. You have to learn how to dance. I think there are a lot of kids that just haven't, because of the participation trophy, like they don't know how to lose, so they don't know how to win properly. Like we have to learn how to lose so that we can learn how to win in a way that's authentic and like actually real in some way.
I remember I was a school teacher in the early 90s, and there was a big thing then trying to push non-competitive game. We're going to do that with the kids.
That was the staple of youth ministry, right? They called them ungames. Ungames was such a funny term.
Yeah. And then they couldn't figure out why the kids wouldn't want to play them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What are they thinking about? Well, everybody needs to be a winner. Why?
Uh-huh. And again, if you get into the gender differences, I could turn an ungame into a competitive game in the first minute.
They do. The kids do too.
Yeah. So funny. Yeah. So funny. Let's talk a little bit more about Hunter. What else are you kind of seeing around you? So again, this is the worst phrasing of the question. I apologize to everybody, but I think you're pretty perceptive. What would you think are the big things? Okay, but let's say, and again, this is maybe the most mundane question of the day, but what do you think? Let me go into, it's my interest. I just received an appointment to run my local Catholic parish. I'm a lay person, but I'd run it before for about 8 years, but it's a real blessing. You're just kind of taken away. You do other things. I worked at a monastery. Then the bishop called and just kind of put me back in place. And I think the first time I just wanted to prove as a non-priest that I could probably imitate a priest. Now I have none of that compunction, right? I'm free. But I thought not that parish leadership needs a theme, but I'm going to ask for people's help with an open door policy to come and talk about what's going on with our young people. Again, because there's so much suffering and suicide in our community. My daughter, who teaches over in a nearby town, she was in a conversation with somebody who, again, can see smiling faces. Oh, the problem isn't so bad. And my daughter said, listen, it's my first year of teaching, and I've already sent so many lesson plans to the psych ward of Strong Memorial Hospital. It's not something I wanted to do. It's not something they trained me for. Talk to me, again, what are you seeing kind of mental health wise? Is there a way to get language for this? Is there a way to exaggerate it? Is it over exaggerated?
I don't think it's over exaggerated at all. I recently, I won't go into details, but I've had some mental health issues personally, but also just in my family and stuff. We've had some pretty big some moments in regards to that. So I think if there's anyone who's like, oh, the anxiety or the depression of the younger generation is they're just weak and they're overblowing it and they just want attention. Like, I don't think that's true. I don't know what the source of it is, but I will say very confident that it seems a lot more prevalent. There's a real sense of uneasiness. And I don't know, again, what the source of that was. I think COVID kicked up a lot of that dust for a lot of people. I know it did for me. And
lockdowns and masks definitely contributed, like very concretely for me.
And I think it was by design. I think it was by design.
I agree about the by design portion as well. But I think it's still sticking. I think Mike and I were at a Franciscan retreat a few months ago over in the spring, and I think I said the spirit of quarantine, and it's still stuck for a lot.
Even after the masks are gone, we all liked that phrase. The spirit of quarantine remains even after the masks are gone.
Yeah.
But I think it latched onto the anxieties and stuff that have already been there, and I don't know what the sources of them are. I don't know if it's this lack of reality that we're in, the modernity, the impersonalness and all that. And it makes us as human beings kind of feel like, oh, I don't have my tribe you maybe would have used to have and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know what exactly the source of it is, but I can say very confidently that it seems like the mental health issue, it's definitely a real thing and it's not overblown. And it is definitely something that it needs a remedy. I don't know what that remedy is. I'm not the person to answer that question, but
Michael, I'll share with you that again, what I heard yesterday is that, and none of us are going to mourn their passing, but universities, especially in this part of the country where there's not demographic increase, we have a demographic winter here, but a real moment of humanity broke out between me and this administrator saying, all we're trying to do is to get students to come here. It's a 4-year college and to live here in our dorms. And so we can form them. But he goes, at the same time, we're on the cusp of telling a very significant percentage of students that you shouldn't come here. Not that we're too elite, but you need services that we can't provide. You can't hire your way out of this problem. If they added 50 more full-time, highly trained psychologists and things, they can't begin to get at it. So they need to communicate to people that maybe you need to take 2 classes a semester. Maybe you need to commute from home and make getting well your first priority. And that stayed with me, boy, because again, the university is going to be working at cross purposes there because all they want is for people to come in the doors. Michael?
I've been in higher education for a long time. And I know it's dying. I mean, I was at a school that died, so I find myself out of a job.
Literally died. Yeah,
it did. It really died. And the rest of them are dying. I just talked to a friend whose wife works at a pretty big state university, and she's in the English department. And her chair said they want us to cut $10 million from the arts and humanities budget, which means they're going to start to cut loose full professors and tenured professors, that's tragic, but this is, there just aren't the people out there. Which is why schools are, offering esports scholarships and other bowling scholarships just to get people in, right? And most of those students, I wouldn't say most, but a good number of them shouldn't be in college anyway, because they don't want to really go.
And that's from people who don't praise the ivory tower.
They think think they're supposed to go, but they could make it. In fact, we had a guy fix our furnace about 1.5 years ago. He said, "Do you have any kids?" Well, a couple. And he said, "Tell them to get into this field. You can't get anybody to work." My brother has a painting business. He can't find anybody to work. And my brother makes, $500,000 a year. He makes a lot of money. And the heating and cooling guy, he said you can make $100,000 a year doing this almost right out of the gate. So why go to college, right? Unless you want to go to college for the pursuit of wisdom. Now, if you go into medicine or tech or engineering, that might be you can get a gig that way.
Sure.
But in the humanities, in fact, and so what I think is going to happen, or at least this is what once I get through this CSA season and start putting it together, is I think that there is a room for a kind of what they called in Poland during communism a flying university, and what they called in Irish history a hedge. I think there's a possibility for a kind of call it a Sophia University that's outside of this, and you could do it by Zoom, you could do it in person, but where you have a non-institutional pursuit of wisdom. You saw this in the with the American Transcendentalists. Emerson and Thoreau had schools of maybe not 20, 50 people where people could study to find wisdom. And I think that what I've taught when I've seen in students and people like you, Hunter, that there's a hunger for that, and it's not generally offered through the institutional structure, which is, I think, all the institutions are in zombie mode right now. And but I think there's a possibility for this. And in fact, a couple of friends of mine said, "You got to do this, Mike. You got to do this." I just haven't had time to do it. But one of my projects
I need a free afternoon. Yeah.
No kidding. Yeah.
But I agree. Though there's a big there's with a more than you would think. It's not the majority necessarily, but more than you would think. There is that thirst for like that wisdom, because they're just. It's not around us. I was in Italy over the summer, and you're walking the streets, and you go into these churches that are at every corner, and the wisdom is there. It's there. It's because it's there in the cult. You can go around, you can kind of see it, and it's not doled out to you, but it's sort of impressed upon you. And we don't even really have that. So I think a lot of kids are realizing that, oh man, like when I walk down the street and I can see like a McDonald's and a Kohl's and a this and a that. They're like, well, where is that wisdom? So they're very much thirsting for it. I think that's part of the reason is we don't have it impressed upon us by culture in the same way that maybe it used to be.
Yeah. Well, I think
maybe I'm wrong, but it feels that way.
So when I teach, I always teach stuff I love, because I know as a teacher that the word enthusiasm means to be filled with the God. So when I'm teaching literature, I totally get into it, right? Teaching the Romantic poets. Whereas I don't think everybody, but lots of people in English studies and literature, they don't teach out of a love for their subject. They teach basically out of a talent in writing and a talent in reading, but they basically want to teach you that, they teach through an ideological lens, whether it's feminism or Marxism or whatever. So basically you're trying to teach students that literature is a fraud. And then they can't figure out why they can't get majors. All these kids who loved books and loved reading, loved Shakespeare in high school, they go to study this, and you're like, no, it's just it's all white men trying to rip you off, which is tragic. But I still when I taught this course on romanticism last year, it was all women in the class, and they were totally into it because we were luxuriating in the sensation of poetry,
right,
not trying to prove what a creep or what a tool of the imperial that John Keats was or whatever, right? We weren't playing that game. In fact, I think the reason when you do that, you start with William Blake. He's kind of like the palate cleanser. Okay, we're gonna do William Blake first, and then you're gonna clear out all
battering ram. Yeah.
There it goes. The whole thing. It's all gone now. We can start fresh.
He's bottomless, by the way. Bottomless. I'm just staying with it. It's so relevant. Now, Hunter, talk about college soon. Going to be leaving for class. What we're going to do, and I think Michael would agree, you've been so good, but we're going to have you back on again, maybe monitor this year at some point. Give us some closing words and insights and thoughts, Hunter.
Yeah, I think Michael, you were just, and I think this kind of clicked with me as my closing thought, is that for too long we've been, as my generation, through the education system, through the political system that's sort of been impressed upon us, is we've been told to analyze, look, be critical of everything. And we have not really been taught how to just experience things.
Right.
And that lack of just experiencing and just being in reality, I think, is one of the roots of the reason that we see so much anxiety, because kids don't know how to just be. I don't know how to just be. I'm just starting to learn, because instead it's analysis. And if all you know how to do, the only frame of the world you have is this analytical, a lot of times cynical, a lot of times postmodern perception of the world.
Yeah.
If you're deconstructing the whole world, you can't live in it.
We feel in order to understand. Yeah.
Well, right. And this is what my guiding principle as a teacher has always been this thing that Samuel Taylor Coleridge said, that he who shows me that there are faults in a work of literature doesn't show me anything I couldn't figure out myself. Yeah. But he who shows me the wonders in a work of literature, now he's doing something, right? He's offering me something for my soul. And I think that's something we have lost in education. Wonder.
Awesome.
Right? The word you used earlier.
Yeah. To the Wonder, another great Terrence Malick movie. Hunter, Hunter was recently gobsmacked by a slow, complete viewing of Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev, Michael. So we'll have to talk about that.
If I'm on I'd love to talk about that. Greatest movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, a lot of people say that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's good. Good one.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hunter, so great to have you on. I'll be seeing you again even this weekend. Michael, you have a good week. Everybody, thanks for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. We're going to keep this thing going. We're having a good time. We hope you are. So again, find us on YouTube at Regeneration Channel. Put Michael Martin's name in there, or Mike Sauter's when you're just Googling it, or Podbean, Spotify, other podcasts listening. The Regeneration Podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you all again.
Farewell.